Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the detention center being called Israel's Guantanamo Bay. Why the arrest of Israeli soldiers accused of torture sparked protests supporting them.
If they touch our soldiers, we'll build a shield wall. The people will rise up against the government, be it left or right or whatever. Nobody can touch our soldiers.
I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Just a note for today's episode, our conversation includes discussion of sexual assault. Before the assassinations in the Middle East last week and their aftermath, this was the debate in Israel. It's at a meeting of lawmakers from the Knesset, Israel's parliament. Lawmaker Ahmed Tibi asks, to insert a stick in a person's rectum, is that legitimate?
להכניס מקל לרקטום של בן אדם, זה לגיטימי? כן, אם הוא נוח'בה, הכל לגיטימי לעשות לו. הכל! הכל!
Tibi is questioning a member of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. The Likud lawmaker's answer to Tibi is yes. Referring to a unit of Hamas fighters, he says, if he is Nukhba, everything is legitimate to do. This debate followed reports of a Palestinian detainee who was reportedly hospitalized for wounds so severe he can't walk. His treatment in Israeli detention, along with the thousands of other Palestinians being held without charge or trial, is a story that's still reverberating, despite the hostilities that continue to unfold across the region.
My name is Nida Ibrahim, and I'm Al Jazeera's correspondent in the occupied West Bank, Palestine.
Nida, thank you so much for joining us today because it is a busy one, and so I appreciate you making the time for us. A lot has been happening where you are. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas declared a day of national mourning following the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Iran. Meanwhile, our network is mourning the death of two of our colleagues, Al Jazeera Arabic correspondent Ismail El-Ghul and cameraman Rami Arifi. They were killed in an Israeli attack in Gaza. How are you doing with all of that?
Well, let's first say that I'm not in the besieged Gaza Strip, and my heart goes out to all of our colleagues who have been reporting, including the family of Ismail, who have been in Gaza, going through famine, going through a continuous genocide, not knowing what they're going to have to deal with the next day. And yet still, it hurts to see yet another journalist being killed in the line of duty, and reminds us all of the previous killings of Palestinian journalists at the hands of Israeli forces that went without any accountability, including our own Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Aql, who was killed in Jenin in the occupied West Bank 2 years ago. And we're also talking about Hamza Dahlouh and Samir Abu Daqqa, who also have been killed. So yet another reminder of how haunting it is to be a journalist. We're losing yet another young Palestinian aspiring journalist who probably was aiming all of his career to, join Al Jazeera, be on a major news network, carry the news to the world, and his life was cut short just because of what he's doing. It's hard to put words to the feelings, but, there was a deep sigh in the office amongst the team. And it's just really, it's too soon to put it into words, I guess. The cycle of news doesn't stop at anyone's death, at anyone's good or bad news. And this is the duty that people knew that is going to be entrusted upon them to do when they became journalists. So I don't want to dwell on our or my personal journey, but I know that there are journalists in the besieged Gaza Strip are going through the impossible, and they're still carrying the mantle and telling the story to the world. And for me, these are the true heroes.
Yeah. For you and me both. So, Nida, what we are here to talk about today is a story that is very disturbing, even in a news cycle full of disturbing events. As you mentioned, this is what the news is like. And today we're going to talk about the news of the Israeli soldiers who were arrested on suspicion of sexually abusing a Palestinian detainee. In response to those arrests, Israeli protesters stormed the Sde Teiman detention center in solidarity with the soldiers, and the protesters were accompanied by far-right Knesset members. There was yet another protest where the soldiers were held for questioning. So walk me through what happened these last few days.
Well, what happened is that we've heard that Israeli interrogators went in to talk to 9 soldiers within the Sde Teiman military detention that was already a military camp and was turned into a military detention site ever since the war started. And they started talking to the soldiers that have been in question to be involved in a sexual assault case and a rape against one Palestinian detainee who was inside that detention site. And we've seen Israeli right-wing activists and Israeli activists storming and trying to get inside the prison, saying that they don't want their soldiers to be interrogated. And this is not something new. We've seen in many cases how the Israeli public surrounds the soldiers in question with the support. I think what was shocking is that the Israeli activists are defending acts of potential sexual assault and rape against Palestinians.
Without going into too much detail, what do we know about this actual case?
Well, there are conflicting reports about what happened, but one of the stories we've heard is that some of them managed to put inside the body of that man a cell phone, and they were ringing that cell phone. And then when they were trying to get it out, the man was bleeding. Again, we don't know much. It's already a story that's being hushed, but I can tell you that the sexual assault allegations against these soldiers are not something new and not something that we have not heard here before. We've interviewed many Palestinians who talked about it, many others who prefer never to talk about these acts. And we've heard different testimonies from Palestinians themselves saying what they were subjected to when it comes to torture, when it comes to ill-treatment, and when it comes to specifically sexual assault.
Well, since these protests broke out, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu strongly condemned the clashes at the detention center. But there have been investigations and reports about this detention facility for months.
Human rights groups and international organizations described abusive and humiliating treatment, including holding blindfolded and handcuffed detainees in cramped cages, as well as beatings, intimidation, and harassment.
The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, interviewed hundreds of released detainees who reported abuses there. So what do we know about this detention center?
Well, the little we know is already enough to freak us out of what's happening there. Since the war started, Sde Teiman has been known as a notorious place where inhumane actions against Palestinians take place. And we've heard some accounts from even Israeli whistleblowers, doctors who were working inside the camp, who have decided to come out and talk about this issue. They were interviewed even anonymously by some media organizations, saying how the facility is putting Palestinians under inhuman conditions when it comes to sleeping, when it comes to being blindfolded all the time, when it comes to beating, when it comes to, they don't have access to lawyers, as we all know.
Eyewitness accounts describe a field hospital with 15 to 20 patients, virtually naked and blindfolded, with hands and feet shackled to their beds and wearing diapers. Painful procedures were carried out by underqualified medics.
So we're talking about severe cases of torture, mentally and physically against these Palestinians that has not only been said and revealed by these whistleblowers, but also by Palestinians who have been released from such detention centers and talking about their miserable conditions inside the detention center.
After the break, how this detention center came to be and why it's become a microcosm of Israel's treatment of Palestinian detainees. So, Nida, as you mentioned earlier, we know human rights groups have long sounded the alarm about abuses in Israeli prisons. But this detention center that we've been talking about is actually a military base that's been partially converted into a detention camp. You referenced that earlier. But how did it happen?
Well, let me just add one point of reference for us to understand how notorious that detention center is. Out of the 48 Palestinian prisoners who were pronounced dead in Israeli detention centers who are originally from the besieged Gaza Strip, 36 of those were in Sde Teiman. So it has this reputation of being very notoriously the most horrible place you could be in, really, right now when it comes to Israeli detention centers. And what happened is that ever since the war started, there was a military order that considered all the prisoners who have been taken out from the besieged Gaza Strip to be considered as unlawful combatants rather than prisoners of war. And one of the places they were put in is Sde Teiman, which was a military camp that has been turned into a detention center. There are two other detention centers, but Sde Teiman remains the most notorious one amongst them all.
So finally, Nida, we've been talking about detainees from Gaza, but the arrests aren't exclusive to Gaza. You've been reporting on Israel's arrest raids in the occupied West Bank for years. And since October 7th, more than 9,700 Palestinians have been arrested by Israeli forces in the West Bank. You spoke to several people who have spent time and have reported abuses. Can you tell me about Muazzaz Ubayyad, who spent 9 months in Israeli prisons?
Yes, Muazzaz was a bodybuilder. He was someone who has very huge muscles. And when he came out of prison after those 9 months, he came out like very visibly weak, lost a lot of weight, but also he did not and could not recognize his own family members in the beginning because of the torture he was subjected to. And he was telling me that they hit him at sensitive spots in his body. So we understand from him that the torture was physical, but it was also mental.
Thank God we brought us back from the dead. Only God knows what happened to us. No food, water, or medicine. They beat me everywhere. My head, my legs, and my hands. They didn't even respect my previous injury and hit me on it.
So he was in deep shock that a man his size, his stamina, to be hurt and to be put in a similar situation, we believe that his mind could not take it. I've also met Mohammed Matar in the first few days of the war, and he was detained by Israeli forces and Israeli settlers, as well as he was trying to protect a Palestinian Bedouin community. And he was telling us the very difficult testimony of how he was sexually abused while he was in detention, and how part of the torture he was subjected to was inserting a stick into his body in sensitive areas to, humiliate him. So we understand that the sexual abuse against Palestinians is a sensitive issue, and that's why not everything that has happened you would hear the testimony of right away. So who knows what we will uncover in the next few months and years even.
Will there be any accountability?
What Palestinians feel Israel was trying to do with the so-called investigation is that they want to create the image, a PR image, that they are investigating and looking into the cases of sexual abuse. But as we've been seeing from the assaults from Israeli soldiers and Israeli settlers against Palestinians. Just to give you an idea, like Israeli settlers' attacks against Palestinians have been increasing, and out of all of them, only 3% of such cases have resulted in a conviction. If that tells you anything, it tells you about the reality of Palestinians. It tells you about the lack of accountability and the impunity that the Israeli forces and settlers feel when they attack Palestinians.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Sarí el-Khalili, Khaled Soltan, Ashish Malhotra, and Sonia Bhagat, with Noor Wazwaz, Veronique Ishaya, Doha Mosaad, Manahil Naveed, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Alexandra Locke. The Take production team is Amy Walters, Ashish Malhotra, Catherine Nouhan, Chloe K. Lee, Doha Mosaad, Khaled Soltan, Manahil Naveed, Marcos Bartolomé, Noor Wazwaz, Sarí el-Khalili, Sonia Bhagat, Tamara Khandaker, and Veronique Ishaya. I'm your host, Malika Bilal. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Joe Plord mixed this episode. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.